You are now listening to an exclusive interview on Sounds of Success with Noah Swiderski.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Sounds of Success. Today, we're talking to a literal history maker who's flipping the script on the system. Becca Engle was told she'd never speak or teach. Now, she's an award-winning author, master educator, and a policy powerhouse who's killing the compliance game to build classrooms that actually respect neurodivergent souls. She's the voice for the kids being silenced. Becca, glad to have you on the mic.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I appreciate it. What's the biggest lie the education system tells parents about success?
We prioritize compliance, and I think that teachers view if this child is compliant, they are now successful. If this child just nods and says yes to me, this child is a success. And I would say that that is the biggest lie we've shared in our education system, is that, if this child complies, they're following the definition of successful.
And I read some of your story. So inspiring to many others. You were actually nonverbal as a kid. How did it feel to finally take the mic and make history at 19?
When I started speaking, it came by surprise to everyone because it wasn't supposed to happen. I ran for office at 19, and when I took that opportunity, I downplayed it because it was precinct chair. You kind of are like, meh, it's precinct chair, whatever. And then, you have people coming up to you who are in, state and congressional offices telling you that you're the youngest ever elected woman in the state. And then you look back at your background and you're like, holy crap, I really am. Like when you look at the, data, and then, of course I was on the ballot because my seat was contested over. And so that was a whole nother thing, right? So now not only was I the youngest elected woman, but I was also the youngest elected woman to be on a ballot. And I think that, was just completely eye-opening. It was never something I saw for myself or anyone saw for me.
It sounds like it just naturally came in your path and it just happened. And I feel like a lot of the most successful things in life kind of happen that way. Why are behavior charts sometimes not effective for neurodivergent kids?
Yeah, so behavior charts are, first of all, not effective for any kid because you're measuring a thing that is determined by you, right? If you went around a classroom and, you see all these behaviors, right? My definition of good would be very different than your definition of good. But also behavior is not always a choice driven by motivation, and it's not always a response driven by, it's always a response driven by neurology. And many neurodivergent kids aren't opting out of these expectations. They're navigating these sensory overloads, these communication barriers, anxiety, executive functioning challenges in real time. When you have a chart that tracks points, colors, rewards, whatever, it doesn't teach regulation or skills. It just records whether a child was able to cope that day. So the kids never actually learn how to respond to these behaviors that are happening inside their nervous system. They're simply, being able to comply with your chart. And for most of these kids, these behavior charts actually increase stress. There's public tracking, there's delayed rewards, there's frequent losses, right? I can say you'll get the reward at the end of the day. There's triggers, there's masking, there's, dysregulation. Instead of supporting growth, the chart becomes a visual reminder of failure, especially for students whose nervous systems don't respond predictably to external rewards.
Thinking about others, you were actually told at one point that you were too autistic or you had limitations to teach. How do you use that, I guess, feedback or shade as fuel to move forward?
I was actually told 3 times during my undergrad within 3.5 years that I was not able to teach due to my autism. I was labeled early as limited. When you're labeled early as limited, you become intimately aware of how systems define confidence, often without understanding neurodivergent brains. Perspective, I could either internalize it or I could use it as feedback on how we design support for others. For me, it means being cautious with tools like the behavior charts or the compliance-based systems. I live what it feels like to have your capacity measured externally, publicly, and repeatedly, and to have your regulation mistaken for motivation. I think that history didn't disqualify me from teaching or leadership. If anything, it sharpened my ability to see when a system is measuring the wrong thing. I was always told, well, you're very, very smart, but your autistic communication style won't work. And if anything, a lot of the time, my students who are also on the spectrum or have ADHD or, have a disability, they connect to my communication style. They're like, wow, she communicates like me. And so I'm able to explain things and understand why they may ask a question or do something that isn't necessarily seen as professional. Like I've had students ask me, what's your salary? Well, in a neurotypical world, we know that's not an appropriate question to ask. But of course, I understand their brain length. And I can be like, hey, like that's not a neurotypical type question, but technically my salary is Googleable. So it's hard for me to be like, hey, I'm not going to tell you that.
What does a humane classroom look like to you?
Yeah. So I actually have a design. It's called the 3 zones of space. It's all dedicated to the nervous system. It regulates movement, body motions, sound, noise, all of it. When you've been the kid who's misunderstood, overmanaged, underestimated, you don't rush to control behavior, and the system doesn't. It takes a directional path. There are ways to release energy, ways to regulate your nervous system, ways to calm down. To me, a humane classroom isn't silent or perfectly compliant. It's regulated. It's a space where students don't have to earn dignity, where their supports show up before a breakdown, where behavior is treated as communication rather than defiance. It's predictable without being rigid, structured without being cold. It looks like adults co-regulating instead of the escalating. It looks like flexibility without chaos, right? That's why I have 3 zones and not a calm down corner. It looks like students being taught how to manage their bodies and emotions in those zones, and not punished for struggling to do so. Progress is measured in safety, trust, and skill building, and not just charts.
Now, grit versus regulation. Why is pushing through the pain, I guess, a scam?
I feel like pushing through the pain is a scam because ignoring your nervous system doesn't build resilience. It builds burnout. We were taught to push through the pain, but all it really does is teach the body it won't be listened to. And the idea that growth only comes from pushing through pain is a myth. Regulation, not endurance, is what actually creates capacity. And pushing through the pain is formed as a strength, but many neurodivergent people, it's just a delayed collapse. And we have NASA technology now to actually read how the nervous system is responding to stress signals. And we have that technology here in our city at certain offices. And you may not actually feel the stress, and then you look at the scan like that and you're like, holy crap, my neck is red or my back is red, or different parts of your nervous system are freaking out, but you don't even notice it until it's too late.
And you mentioned masking towards the beginning of the call. How does masking in school lead to burnout in adulthood?
There was a lot of hiding myself in school and having to comply. And so I didn't know my own personality. And so it forced me to spend my energy pretending to be acceptable instead of actually learning. And when kids are constantly monitoring your tone, their posture, stimming, eye contact, volume, reactions, their brain in survival mode, right? And I could go on. That's not resilient. It's exhaustion with good manners. And for neurodivergence, masking is often rewarded in the short term. You look well behaved. You don't cause disruptions. You get praised for coping. I mean, I got praised all the time. But the cost showed up later because eventually I was like, well, I can cope and be loud at the same time. Or, I had moments in college where I was allowed to speak up or give a presentation and I was completely obnoxious and it was like a different side of me came out. And, these things, these costs show up later as anxiety, the shutdowns, depression, or total academic disengagement. By high school, I failed almost every class because I was so burnt out from being that A-B student and being the one who always complied that by the 8th grade, I was done. I feel like a healthier goal isn't teaching kids how to mask better. It's building the classroom where they don't have to.
Now, the 3 zones, can you explain your 3-zone regulation model in, I guess, plain English?
Yeah. So I'll try to keep it to 3-zone regulation by like in plain English, but it's built around how the nervous system actually works, not how we wish it would behave. Instead of asking, are you behaving? Like, are you good? It states what state are you in and what supports make learning possible right now. So zone 1, it's regulation, safety first. If a student isn't regulated, nothing else matters. Regulation looks like calm enough, safe enough, settled enough, not silent, not still, not grounded. It's the supports live here. You have your sensory tools, you have your movement, you have the quiet corner, right? You have these predictable routines, you have your schedule, your calendars, your students' calendars and schedules. It's not a reward, it's a prerequisite. Your engagement zone is where you release all your energy. You're running around in circles, you're jumping up and down, you're bouncing, you're throwing a ball. Some may just look around and observe. And zone 3 is autonomy. It's recognizing that. It's you making choices. It's journaling. It's reflecting on your own actions. It's, based around your independence. It grows slowly. This one you probably will be in the longest because it's that final reflection of what worked for me. How did I calm my nervous system? How did I regulate? And how do I recognize this calmness within me?
How you just mentioned, like, I guess the anger part.
Yeah.
How is that actually a superpower in some eyes? And if at all, and maybe it's a tool you could use for advocacy.
I feel like autistic anger usually shows up when something is objectively wrong. There's injustice, there's the hypocrisy, there's a sensory overwhelm, broken system, someone crossing a boundary. Calling it normal is really the best way to put it. It's not random, it's not petty, it's pretty much a signal that your nervous system has detected a mismatch between the reality and what's being demanded of you. Holistic culture, which is someone who is not autistic, trains people to smooth things over, tolerate nonsense, and stay polite at their own expense. And autistic anger refuses to do that. It cuts through social fog and goes, nope, this is broken. And you call shit out on its point, right? Autistic anger isn't supposed to be manipulative or performative, but it comes off that way to your holistic people. I feel like it's direct, intense, it's rooted in truth, right? Because when we're regulated and supported, we have moral clarity. And I think that the problem isn't autistic anger. The problem is environments that ignore the early signals and then act shocked when our alarms go off.
What's one truth about disability that people are too scared to say out loud?
That we are still probably the farthest away from justice for disabled people than we are any other group that I can think of off the top of my head. I think that we are far from justice for all groups, but I think that disability, we are so focused on the wrong things, and there's so many different interpretations of what disabled people need that aren't being determined by disabled people, because disabled people have the least accessibility to speak out and step out in terms of communication methods and all of that.
Where can people find you if they want to consume your content, they want to see your videos, they want to stay up to date with you, Becca? Where can people find you?
If you Google my name, I'll pop up, and you don't need to attach my city or anything, but you can also find me on Instagram at Stitches and Stanzas. You can find me on Facebook at Stitches and Stanzas, and I'll have a website soon, and that will be stitchesstanzas.com.
Thank you so much for being on the episode.
Yeah, thank you.
That was a real episode from a real one. Becca is proof that if the system wasn't built for you, you go out and build your own. Go grab her books, check out all her stuff at Stitches and Stanzas, and stop settling for compliance. I'm Noah Swiderski. Stay bold, stay successful, and thank you for listening.